Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are unpacking a really fascinating book by Mason Currey called Daily Rituals. It's basically this deep dive into the quirks, the habits, and the incredibly strict schedules of some of history's most renowned creators and thinkers. And to make this book summary review even more fun to explore, we're going to bring these historical figures to life using some really vibrant, colorful cartoon characters and graphics along the way.
Here is our quick roadmap for today. First, we'll go inside daily rituals. Then we'll meet the great minds, talk about waking up and walking, discuss what the book actually missed, and finally, give you our final verdict.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, Inside Daily Rituals, the premise. The sheer volume of people covered in this text is honestly pretty staggering. The book details the daily rituals of 160 different people. We're talking artists, philosophers, musicians, and a really heavy emphasis on writers. The timeline for these 160 figures mostly spans from the 18th and 19th centuries right up to the modern era. So, there's no Napoleon or Julius Caesar here, but the historical sweep of modern creators is vast. But here is where the structure gets really fascinating. All 160 of those lives, they're squeezed into roughly 270 pages. If you do the math on that, it means most of these legendary figures are just getting a rapid-fire, single-page summary of their daily habits. It's quick, it's punchy, and it forces the text to focus strictly on what they did hour by hour, rather than getting bogged down in sprawling biographical details. All right, moving on to Section 2. Meet the Great Minds, the cast. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer variety we're dealing with. We have a truly diverse cast of brilliant minds, visualized today as these fantastic, colorful, floating cartoon heads. You've got absolute titans like Ernest Hemingway, Albert Einstein, Jane Austen, Vincent van Gogh, Mark Twain, Charles Darwin, and Stephen King. But the book doesn't just stick to the megastars. It wonderfully balances these famous names alongside lesser-known figures, at least lesser-known to some of us, like Flannery O'Connor or William Styron. It really becomes this fantastic jumping-off point to go explore the works of people you might never have even heard of before. Now, as for how all these colorful characters are presented, it's kind of oddly organized. There is surprisingly absolutely zero chronological order to the book, which feels a little strange at first. But to make up for it, you do get a few anchoring black and white photos, some incredibly detailed notes, and a super useful index at the back. Because of this setup, it is wonderfully fun to just pick up, flip to a random page, and start exploring. Which brings us to Section 3, Waking Up and Walking, the routines. When you analyze the actual daily schedules across the board, you see a massive contrast of extremes. On one side, you have the hyper-dedicated early birds, people rising strictly at 5 a.m. or exactly 5:15 a.m., well before the sun comes up, just to get their work done. And then, completely on the flip side, you have the night owls. People who wouldn't dream of waking up early, who happily went to bed at 10 or 11 p.m. after working late into the night. It just proves that there is absolutely no single correct time to create. But if there is one universal, ultimate creative hack shared among these 160 geniuses, it's actually incredibly simple. You just need to go for a long walk. Over and over again in the book, the overwhelming consensus for finding inspiration and sorting through complex ideas is just getting outside and walking. It's honestly the most common thread tying all these vastly different routines together. I do have to inject a little bit of relatable skepticism here, though. The text claims some of these figures were so dialed in that they would stop working at precisely 4 p.m., not a minute later, and then go walk for exactly 2 hours. You kind of have to wonder, were they just constantly staring at their pocket watches? And more importantly, how much easier was it to stick to these rigid routines without the modern distractions we face? I mean, they didn't have mobile phones pinging them, TVs blaring in the background, or the endless scroll of the web. It really makes you question if sticking to such strict timing is even possible in our current era.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, What the Book Missed, the gaps.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is who didn't make the cut. While the book has a very heavy focus on traditional writers, philosophers, and a few scientists, there are some major gaps. There are absolutely no comic book writers or artists, which feels like a huge missed opportunity. There are no politicians, zero astronauts, and very few physical creators like potters or sculptors. For example, someone like the famous sculptor Barbara Hepworth is just completely absent. And this builds into a few other missing details. Because the timeline mostly starts in the 18th century, we lose out entirely on 14th and 15th century figures. The entries also frequently fail to mention geographic locations, which is a bummer. It would be so helpful to know if a routine was happening in rural Kentucky or bustling London. There's also a noticeable imbalance. There are vastly more men than women featured. Plus, hearing from the spouses of these creators, like Sigmund Freud's wife, Martha Freud, would have provided such a fascinating outside angle on these rigid schedules. And of course, everyone is going to find a personal favorite missing, like the author J.G. Ballard.
Which finally leads us to Section 5, the final verdict, the takeaway.
The crucial point here is captured perfectly in this quote. It's all messing around in their heads and mixing together to come out with some amazing work. See, the book promises to show how great minds make time, and it totally does that. But finding actual inspiration, that doesn't come from staring at a clock. Inspiration comes from how they used their time, their relationships, their observations of the world, all of it just tumbling around in their heads until a masterpiece emerges. So, the final verdict is that despite a few missing pieces, Daily Rituals is a thoroughly enjoyable and highly recommended explainer of human habits. It's the perfect book for just dipping in and out of. In fact, it's so good it leaves you wishing for entire sequel volumes. Imagine a volume dedicated entirely to the rituals of women, or exclusively on scientists, or purely focused on visual artists. The format is really just that engaging. Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on today. What does your daily ritual look like? Are you an early riser? Are you a night owl? Or maybe you're someone who just needs a really long walk to get the ideas flowing. Hopefully, seeing how the greats structured their time inspires you to take a closer look at your own daily habits. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and keep learning.